Hello all, my name is Eli. I'm a student here at Yale Law School. I'm a 2L. I'm doing an AMA today and Ask Me Anything based off questions that I received on Reddit. In the past, I've made my application materials available online in a Medium post, which I'll make available below. I hope that that helps. I'll also include some resources to things that other law students have put together in the admissions office has, because they've gotten better in the last few years at making information more accessible that you can check out as well, and we hope that helps. So before I start answering questions, I want to just say that whatever I say is based off my own experience. It doesn't speak for everyone. I think you have to be aware of my own biases, just who I am as a person, where I come from, my experiences, which I'll touch on a little bit as I talk through. And so, my experience might not be representative of everyone that's here, and you might very well have a different experience just in law school generally or here at YLS specifically. So you've got to consider my biases. I'm also below going to go ahead and include timestamps for each question, so you can skip around to whatever you find useful. You don't have to listen through the whole thing if that's not valuable to you. So the first question was, how accessible are the professors? And I would say that it depends a lot on the professors. That being said, if you really want to build a relationship with a professor, I found that you can do that with almost any professor. Sometimes it just takes a little more activism on your part, whether that means consistent emailing, whether that means talking with an assistant so you can get an appointment scheduled around their schedule, maybe, and not through the professor directly. So there are ways to go about it. I think that some professors definitely have more time and meet with students for longer durations of time. Other professors only have appointments in 15-minute spurts, for example, and I frequently feel like I wish I had more time. But that being said, if you really care about building a relationship with a professor, I think it's possible with at least with every professor I've had. Second question is, does the lack of grades make connection/kiss-assery more important? So I would say two things. First off, while our grades are not like traditional grades, I still think that they matter to some extent based off what career path you go to. So they're not fully meaningless, and so in some classes it's actually necessary to do well, if you want to get, from what I understand, and this is just from what I've heard, a good clerkship or certain types of jobs or whatever. So I wouldn't say that they don't matter entirely, but I would agree with the sentiment that frequently people feel the need to build connections with people in order to make strides in their career. I mean, I've been fortunate in that I wouldn't say that kiss-assery is the way to do it. I genuinely like a lot of my professors. I genuinely, I take classes that I really enjoy. And so for me, I wouldn't call it kiss-assery to go and have office hours with a professor that you like in a class that you enjoy, just to talk about things that you're interested in, right? As long as it's not superfluous. So I think that some people might engage in some superfluous activity. That's fine. For me, that's not the case. I genuinely like building relationships with the professors. I've done this my whole life because I really prize mentorship and learning and all that. So that's what I'd say is that, yeah, connections are valuable, and obviously if you're applying for clerkships, there's some amount of, you need recommendation letters and all that, but in my experience, it's never been superficial. It's always been because I genuinely care. The next question is, do you ever feel impostor syndrome, and if so, how do you deal with it? Yeah, I do frequently. I did when I first arrived here. It was quite debilitating. My first semester here was a huge transition for me. It was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I think there are a few reasons for this. I mean, number one, my background is I didn't take a gap year out of school. I came straight through. And I went to a state school for undergrad, not an Ivy League. So there was a certain amount of social acclimation that I had to go through that I wasn't used to. I mean, when I was in undergrad, I saw everyone as my classmate, and I was very friendly and open. And what I came to understand is people in law school, at least here, see each other sometimes as classmates, sometimes as friends, but frequently I think the default is as a colleague and as another professional or in a work setting. And so in that case, I think it's really unfortunate that many people have these layers of filters on them when they first meet other people. So that was definitely very difficult in terms of transitioning for me and to the culture shock inherent to that. Also, just the elite nature of it is something I've never experienced before. There are certain cultural standards that people have here that it's almost difficult to name, but just the way that people carry themselves is just different than anything I've ever experienced. So in that case, I definitely did feel imposter syndrome. There are a few things that helped. I mean, first off, I thought that having some people that were very good friends and could kind of snap me out of it and be like, Eli, you're not dumb. Or just say, Eli, you're not crazy. Those simple things are things that really helped me and were vital. So I think it's important to not isolate yourself, because I found law school, especially at the beginning, incredibly socially isolating. And so I think reaching out and building those connections is very stabilizing. I think getting a therapist or getting mental health treatment is important. I started going, well, I've been in therapy in the past, but definitely went to therapy in law school, and got mental health treatment, which was incredibly helpful for me. In stark contrast to online settings, I really don't care when I get mean comments online. I don't take them seriously. They're coming from an honest people. I just think that they're jerks or bullies or idiots or whatever, right? And so I never take it too seriously. I have incredibly thick skin when I write content online and get comments back. But it's almost like that thick skin erodes when I am in interactions with other people that I know and respect, or seemingly respect, because I think they're smart and they're here at Yale Law School. And so the big thing that helped was, I think, just realizing that some people are just toxic, some people are just mean, some people are just bullies, and you don't have to take everyone seriously. And I think what I learned is that there are just some people here, it's not a lot, it's definitely a small number, who didn't come to make friends, who are just mean. And once you accept that and kind of get past like having to please everyone, I think it's a lot easier to live your life. Next question is, did you take out significant debt or know a lot of people that did? I have. I only qualified for a little bit of financial aid. Because of that, when I graduate, with all the interest and everything, I think I'll owe about $300,000, which is quite a bit. And, it's difficult for me to talk about in the future, like whether I'll regret that decision over taking, a full ride somewhere else. I'm only my second year, I'm still taking out debt, right? So I'm not yet paying back, and I don't know yet how much it'll impact my life and my standard of living in the future. So I couldn't tell you now whether the decision was worth it. You can ask in a few years again. What I will say is that people come from different backgrounds. And so I know that there are some people, not very many at Yale Law School, to be fair, who come from incredibly disadvantaged backgrounds and have families that they need to support. And, of course, they qualify for some amount of financial aid, but generally might feel that they need to take a big law job or need less debt to help support the family that they come from. And I totally understand that. Honestly, it's a small percentage of people at Yale Law School. This is an incredibly privileged place. So that being said, for me, I don't have to, I have the privilege to not have to take care of my family. I have a relatively low standard of living. Like right now I'm living on, $25,000 a year, primarily off loans. And I think I live a great life. I don't require any more money. I don't have kids. I don't plan on having kids that soon. So I don't really feel like I am in desperate need of making more money. And also, we have the COPE program here, which is a program to help pay off your loans if you take a job that, in the public interest or in the government or wherever, that doesn't pay as much. So for me, because of those backstops, debt was not as big of a deal because I can live on less money. I know that other people have higher standards of living, and for that, I understand if they are queasy. The other thing is, I don't necessarily plan to be a standardized lawyer, and this ties into the next question that I received, which is, as a no longer starry-eyed 0L who's seriously considering what life will look like post-law school, does it seem crazy or reasonable to take Yale over a Ruby at Chicago? My roommate actually chose Yale over the Ruby. And, one of the things they would say is that if you have an unconventional career ahead of you, if you don't necessarily want to be if you don't want to be a lawyer, if you want to go and work, I don't know, as a journalist, as a politician in policy, whatever, then Yale, or definitely a professor, then Yale is probably the place for you. But if you're planning on doing especially public interest and you don't want that debt hanging over you, or if you're just planning to work at a firm your entire life and that's like what you want to do, then it doesn't necessarily make a ton of sense to come to YLS because I don't think there's that much of added benefit. Now, of course, once again, I'm a 2L. I don't know what it's actually going to look like a few years down the road, but from what I understand, from what I've heard from other people is that, what law school you go to, especially even in the top tier, might matter a lot in the first 5 to 10 years of your career. But longer term, it's not as important a factor, and that's really where your career, your resume, etc., starts having a big impact. So I would say it really depends on what your career path looks like and whether you have to support family, whether you care about your standard of living. What do you wish you knew before starting your 1L year? I would say focus on your mental health. Go to therapy right away if you can. See what sort of resources your school has. Another thing I would say is if you have the means, I would try to acquire your books to be able to write in them. I thought it's incredibly helpful to be able to annotate books in the books that I've rented. I feel like it's a disadvantage that I can't take notes directly in the book. But of course, that depends on the reading style. The last thing I would say is that, unfortunately, the whole be yourself and, kind of do whatever you want, live your life as you want is kind of an embellishment of the truth. And I say that as someone who came to Yale and was told by everyone that, you just have YLS on your resume, you're definitely going to get a job, like, don't worry about it. I applied to a ton of firms this last year because many people work in firms over the summer, and I didn't get a single acceptance. Now, I think part of that was the fact that if I really thought about it critically, I maybe wouldn't want to work at most firms. I am interested in the public interest, and I'm going to be working in PI this summer. And that's the sort of life that I want to live. But it clearly was a sort of thing where it came off in my interviews, I think, that this wasn't my number one career path. And I ended up getting rejected broadly, even though I went to Yale from all of these firms, which is, I think, pretty shocking given what everyone else was telling me. I think people set expectations inappropriately. But, as I've been talking to my mentors, I've consistently been told that I need to adjust the way I present myself so that I can fit better into organizations I'm applying to. And that requires, to some extent, shredding who I am, conforming to the standards set. And I think if there was one thing I really could have known before coming in is how much of that would be required so that I would present myself more appropriately for the sort of jobs that I'm applying to and want to hold. It's unfortunate. It seems a little dystopian, but the legal career is full of itself. It's incredibly conformist. And if you really want to get to where you want to go, I wish I'd known that it would require some amount of acclimating and socializing myself to fit the standard set for the profession. What is an underrated aspect of YLS? Now, I think some people would disagree with this, but I think the amount of power that students have is really quite a lot here at Yale Law School. Of course, not everything we advocate for is adopted, and not everything students demand is adopted, especially when it comes to, demands of disadvantaged students. That being said, I think that there's a lot of power for students here to shape their education, what professors they have, what sort of papers they write, and frequently, like, for example, if there's a class that's a deficiency, if there are enough students interested, they'll invite a professor to teach it, or you can start a reading group, or whatever, invite your own speakers. There's a lot of money to bring people you want to the law school. So I would say in those respects, there's a lot of power for students to shape their own educations, and that is something I appreciate. The next question is, do you plan to clerk, and how do you come to that decision either way? Yes, I plan to clerk. I think part of it is the fact that either explicitly or subliminally, I've been impacted by the fact that most of my peers will clerk, and because it's so culturally accepted here that people clerk, I think that played at least some part, and I can't deny it. But more broadly, I want to return to my home state of Colorado, and that's where I want to spend my career as a lawyer. That's where I want to get engaged with public policy. That's where I want to work, or on the judiciary, or whatever. So for me, it's definitely a stepping stone back to my home state. It's a way to understand the way the judiciary works in Colorado, both the state and federal level. It's a way to get mentorships. For me, as I noted earlier, mentorships are a huge thing for me. I love talking with professors. I love getting feedback. I love learning from people who have gone through the path before me. And so for me, that mentorship element, to start my career in a home state is really important. Now, once again, I think you'll hear benefits from different people, especially when they're done clerking. So, maybe in a few years you can ask again whether all those hopes and dreams were realized on the back end of my clerkship. Another question is, what's the rough monthly budget to live in New Haven? Not what the COA says, but what you found in your own experience. Okay, and another question that's related is, how do you feel about New Haven? So I'll start with that question, which is, I love New Haven. I really don't like huge cities like New York City. I know that people have different views on this, but I like a city where I have access to everything I need, whether it's groceries, whether it's, GameStop or whatever. Although many GameStops are closing down now. But also, is small enough that where I can bike around it, where I can navigate, where I can drive around it without too much traffic, where I can get to class, where it doesn't take forever, So there are a lot of concrete benefits of small city living, and I've lived in a lot of smaller cities in my life. And so I appreciate, the size of New Haven, which is, I think, 130,000 for city proper and about 800,000 metro area. Obviously, if you like the hustle and bustle, if you like huge metro systems, it's not necessarily the place for you. But there's a lot of diversity here. There's a lot of diverse cuisine. There's a lot of activism here. There's a lot of local independent media here, which is rare for small cities. So there's a lot of concrete benefits here that I really value and why I think New Haven's a great place to live. In terms of living, it definitely varies if you live with another person, whether you live in downtown or not. I live in a relatively nice neighborhood called East Rock. I pay $800 a month right now, which is the most I've ever paid for an apartment. When I lived in Lansing, there was a point in time where I was paying $350 a month. But understandably, compared to New York, this is incredibly cheap living. I have a nice, spacious apartment. I live with a roommate. In addition, I pay, for car insurance because I have a car here. I live in a part of town where parking is free. If you live in the downtown area, then you have to pay for parking as well. Then I'd say I spend maybe $600 on groceries and eating out per month, and then various other, random things. So overall, the amount I get in loans here to pay for my living is more than enough. But once again, I have a relatively low standard of living, and I understand that people have different standards of living for themselves. And obviously, if you want to live alone in a one-bedroom apartment, it can be $1,100, $1,200 a month. What has your favorite class been so far? So I'll give you two that worked in tandem. In my spring semester, I took First Amendment with Professor Post and The Constitution Goes to School with Professor Driver. These are two common law classes that really changed the way I thought about the Constitution. I think the First Amendment class with Post completely blew my mind. It's kind of rare that you take a class and it completely changes the way you think about a certain subject area. And that was the case with the First Amendment, which is an area I want to work in the future, where Professor Post completely blew my mind in the way I think about the First Amendment. And maybe I'll make another video on detailing what that is and what the modern First Amendment actually looks like and doesn't look like. But, I thought that class was kind of revolutionary. It blew my mind every day. And then The Constitution Goes to School. I really feel strongly about the rights of students, about my own experience in schools growing up, and it felt really relevant to the vast majority of people's lives. Schools are something that permeate every aspect of our society, with funding, with our children going to school, etc., with us being products of many of us of the public education system. So I definitely feel strongly about the way schools should run and function. And so that was a really fascinating class. And both professors are wonderful. Next question. What activities, extracurriculars, internships did you find valuable when writing the application? And that's coupled with another question, which is what preparation in undergrad helped you most for Yale Law School? So I'll say the first thing is, for most schools, outside of the top three, and this is a super cynical view, but there's very little that matters outside of your LSAT score and your GPA. Your extracurriculars generally don't matter. You could be the most wonderful student, but if those numeric measures, for better or for worse, aren't up to snuff, many schools will not look at your application, from what I understand. But more broadly, Yale Law School does, I think, value a lot of extracurriculars pretty highly, although maybe not your standard extracurriculars, but more, out of the box sort of things. For me, it was my experience being a video games journalist, I think, that really drew them in. And you could see that in my application materials. It's a very, I think, unique interest. That being said, I definitely was very engaged in undergrad as well. I worked on voting rights. I worked on civic engagement. I worked on sexual assault related advocacy. I did all sorts of stuff. I did research. I did TA stuff. There's a lot of stuff I did at the undergrad level but that being said, I think I did all of that because it was something that I found personally fulfilling, and it was part of my own self-fulfillment. And so I wouldn't say you should do anything in undergrad, planning ahead for law school. I think that people come in, especially to Yale Law School, with all sorts of backgrounds that are incredibly unique, and everyone succeeds generally here. So, even, people from science backgrounds, people from, who are veterans, all sorts of really incredible and unique backgrounds. So I don't think there's a single skill set. In fact, I think, a lot of the programs that are like, try to sell you a course over the summer that is law school prep or whatever, I think those courses are kind of maybe scams, if I could be so blunt. Like, maybe some people benefit from them pretty highly, but from what I found is not most people don't do anything like that and do just fine in law school. You get socialized. Everyone goes through the same traumatic experiences, I think, at the beginning of law school, with impostor syndrome, with acclimating to the amount of reading, to everything. But more generally speaking, I wouldn't say you should do anything in undergrad specifically to prepare for law school. You should do what you find enjoying. You should engage with your community. You should engage with your hobbies. You should think deeply about the world and do things that you'll find made an impact and that were personally fulfilling for you. So that's what I would say. The last question, which comes in here, is, as a student at the #1 ranked law school in the country, world, what is your opinion of rankings? What is the feeling on campus about all the hubbub with rankings? Okay, this is kind of a funny question to me because I guess it's something that people on the Reddit forums are really into. But I can honestly say I've never spoken with anyone at the law school ever about law school rankings, ever, except for maybe making fun of Harvard because they're kind of like a rival. But other than making fun of the rival school, I've literally never talked with anyone about law school rankings. I definitely think it's something that people are aware of. Like, I think everyone inherently knows that this is the top-ranked school, but it's definitely not something that ever comes up in day-to-day life. It's definitely not something I ever talked with an employer about or anything like that. I think it's just kind of one of those known things that is kept under wrap that people don't really talk about. That being said, and as I said previously, after 5 to 10 years of your career, I don't think people really care that much. The one thing YLS does matter for is if you want to be a professor, because there's a hugely disproportionate number of professors that come out of this institution. So that's something to be aware of. I think more broadly, the thing I would say about lower ranked schools is that frequently they can be great in terms of if you want to stay in that local market. They can be a great place to go. I mean, Michigan State University, for example, my alma mater, has a law school, and if you want to serve as a lawyer in mid-Michigan, it's the place to go. Also Wayne State is a great school there. The one thing I would say is that taking out loans is far less justified. Whereas I think there's definitely a genuine toss-up choice between going to Yale versus taking a full ride at the number 7 or 8 school. I think if you have the choice between, say, the number 30 ranked school and the number 50 ranked school, and number 50 gives you a full ride, you should go there. I think if you look at, there's a website called Law School Transparency that gives you earning outcomes on the back end. And if you're going to school and taking out $250,000 of loans, that's, going up at a 7% interest rate, and their average earnings on the back end are only $60,000, you might never pay off your loans from school, especially if there's no sort of payment program on the back end to help. So that's the one thing I would say about lowering schools, is that I think many of them are scams on the bottom half, because they profit off of these huge government loans of their students and don't actually have the sort of ROI, return on investment, that you can expect. It becomes incredibly predatory. And I'll give you an example as another school in East Lansing, where I went to school, or in Lansing, is Cooley Law School, which has been appropriately made fun of across the board, because students are taking out $250,000 loans, and on the back end are frequently not passing the bar, are not getting good employment outcomes, and might be in debt for the rest of their lives. And those are predatory institutions that you need to avoid. I think going to Cooley on a full ride is different, because I think those lawyers, I know a lot of Cooley lawyers who have had terrific careers, who have worked in politics, who have worked as lawyers and lived successful careers. But you have to look at the averages, and the average Cooley lawyer, or the average graduate today, doesn't work as a lawyer, has huge amounts of debt, and might be in debt for decades to come. So that's really unfortunate, and it's something to be very conscious of as you choose your law school. Thanks all for your questions. If you have any extra questions, you can leave them in the comments. If there are just a few, I'll answer them directly. If there's a lot of questions, then I'm going to go ahead and make another video, because it's a lot easier for me to just talk than to type everything out. But thanks all for watching, and have a good afternoon.